"This isn't negotiable, Mr. Holloway," Clarissa Mott said, lips tight, clipboard angled like a gavel. "Your garage violates community aesthetic standards. You'll need to remove the items or face escalating fines." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her polished shoes, then up at her smug face, and let the silence stretch. Then I said, quietly, "You should know. That garage has a motion-triggered camera, infrared range, and a secondary sensor that pings my personal server every time the door opens, even with a key." She blinked, just once. Then her smile returned, thinner this time. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. My name's Mark Holloway. I'm a retired locksmith, third generation. Built security systems for half the city before I quit. My father fought in 2 wars, carried shrapnel in his leg until the day he died, and left me his cedar trunk full of medals, maps, and stories. That trunk sits at the back of my garage, untouched by time, until now. When Clarissa dropped that notice off, she claimed the violation was visible clutter, but the garage door stays shut, always. What she didn't know was that I'd installed a tiny magnetic sensor on that cedar trunk, the same kind we used on jewelry safes. So, when it shifted last Tuesday, I got pinged. I opened the footage expecting a raccoon, or maybe Ethan messing around. What I saw, Clarissa, in my garage, alone, key in hand, looking around like she had every right to be there. She opened the trunk, took something, pocketed it, didn't even flinch. That's when I remembered the old Marine pin was missing. The one with the 2 stars my dad used to joke meant worth twice as much trouble. She had no idea what she'd just taken from us, and no idea what she'd just triggered. That pin meant everything to my son. Ethan's been holding on to stories about his granddad, like they're oxygen. It's how he stayed grounded when we lost his mom last year. Every Saturday, he'd open the trunk just to hold those medals, like they kept him tethered to something good. So, yeah, when Clarissa violated some imaginary code to walk into our garage and steal a piece of our grief, this stopped being about HOA policy. It became personal. Where are you watching from? Because I want you to hear this. They picked the wrong guy. I'm not a hothead, not a fighter, but I've spent my life studying locks, systems, and the small details people miss when they think they're untouchable. Clarissa doesn't realize yet, but she's not just facing a fine or an angry homeowner. She's standing in the middle of a trap that's already starting to close. By the time I printed the second violation notice, I'd already watched the footage 3 more times. Clarissa didn't hesitate. She moved like someone who thought rules were for other people. The Skype lock gave no resistance. It wouldn't, not if she had the board-issued master. She walked straight to the back corner like she'd been there before, like she knew where the trunk was. The HOA claimed my garage storage created visible clutter that detracted from neighborhood continuity, which was impressive considering the garage door hadn't been open more than a few seconds in the last month. I knew that because Ethan and I kept it locked. I also knew because the magnetic sensor on the main track only logged 1 opening last week, during daylight hours when Ethan was at school and I was on a supply run for the shop. The garage wasn't a mess. The cedar trunk sat in the back left corner under a clean drop cloth. 2 toolboxes flanked it, neither stacked more than shoulder height. It was orderly, deliberate, and sacred. But Clarissa didn't see legacy when she opened that trunk. She saw leverage, or maybe just a chance to feel powerful. She wasn't new to this either. I started asking around. Darla from 3 houses down told me her husband paid a fine last fall for leaving a rake too close to the driveway. Alan on the corner had been written up for using a non-approved mulch. Each of them got a warning first, then an unexplained escalation. Most of them paid the fines just to avoid the hassle, but no one had ever heard of a board member entering someone's garage. That's where this crossed a line. I met Alan in the neighborhood park the next afternoon. He was sweeping acorns off the walking path. He does that 3 days a week, unpaid, just to keep things tidy. "She went into your garage?" he asked, blinking behind his glasses. "With a key." He let out a low whistle. "That's something else. You sure?" I showed him a still image from the footage. Clarissa, profile to camera, chin up, hand on the cedar trunk lid. "Damn," he muttered. "That looks bad." "It is bad," I said, "and I think it's not the first time." Turns out, a couple of residents had mentioned weird feelings. Sheds unlocked, garden tools shifted. But they brushed it off. Nothing was ever missing. Until now. Clarissa's power didn't just come from the bylaws. It came from silence. From people being too tired or busy or scared to push back. The violation notices were the visible part. The fines kept the revenue flowing. But this key was something else entirely. And it made me wonder how many of those notices were pretexts. How many violations were manufactured. That's when I remembered something from the last board election. One of the newer residents, Denise Harper, ran for treasurer on a transparency platform. I hadn't paid much attention then. HOA elections weren't exactly high-drama theater, but she'd spoken softly about balancing enforcement with fairness. She didn't win by much, and she hadn't said a word during my violation hearing, but I remembered her eyes, the way they dropped when Clarissa made her snide comment about some people not understanding community standards. It wasn't agreement. It looked like regret. I didn't know yet if Denise would help me, but I knew this. Clarissa wasn't acting alone. Someone else on the board had to know she had the key. Or worse, they helped her get it. I needed more than righteous anger. I needed proof, patterns, witnesses, a plan, because the HOA had turned into a machine, one that fed on passivity and fear. But machines break down when you know where to press. And I know locks. I know pressure points. Next, I'd find out just how many doors that master key had opened. The community center smelled like linoleum and lemon wipes, the kind of place where rules got passed around like casseroles at a church potluck. I took a seat near the back of the folding chairs. Clarissa was already at the head table, flipping through her manila folders like she was preparing for a congressional hearing instead of a neighborhood budget review. Denise Harper sat 2 chairs down, quietly aligning her pen with the margin of her notes. The meeting hadn't even started, but her posture told me everything. Clarissa sat with her back straight, chin lifted, eyes scanning the room like a queen surveying her peasants. Denise, on the other hand, looked like she was trying to fold herself into her seat. Her mouth pressed into a flat line, shoulders stiff beneath a soft blue cardigan, the kind my wife used to wear on cold Sunday mornings. When Clarissa leaned over and whispered something, Denise nodded. But she didn't look at her. Not once. I watched carefully. When Clarissa chuckled and the other board members laughed along, Denise didn't. She just kept adjusting her pen, then finally capped it and folded her hands like someone bracing for a punch. That was the first crack. When Clarissa called the meeting to order, the tone shifted. They breezed through budget updates, maintenance schedules, pool filter replacements. Then came item 7, community enforcement updates. Clarissa didn't say my name, but her eyes slid to mine as she spoke. We had to issue a second compliance warning to a resident this week due to ongoing storage violations. We hope this won't become a pattern. I didn't flinch, I just stared back. Denise looked down. A few chairs over, a middle-aged woman raised her hand. What kind of storage violation? Clarissa smiled. Garage clutter, visible from the street. It creates visual disharmony. Was the garage door open? The woman asked. Clarissa's pause was one beat too long. It was observed to be open during multiple drive-thrus. Denise shifted. Another neighbor asked, was the homeowner notified before the warning? Clarissa waved it off. The protocol was followed. Denise didn't nod. She didn't move, but her fingers, pressed together so tightly her knuckles paled, told the truth. She wasn't fine with this. She was holding it in. After the meeting adjourned, people shuffled out slowly, conversations blooming in quiet pockets. I waited near the exit, hands in my jacket pockets. Denise walked past, keeping her head down. But when she saw me, her steps faltered for just a second. I said her name. She turned like someone checking for traffic before crossing a street. Cautious, nervous. I won't make a scene, I said. But I think you already know what happened. She didn't ask what I meant. She didn't even pretend not to know. Instead, she glanced back toward Clarissa, who was still surrounded by her usual ring of allies, and lowered her voice. Not here. Then where? Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. Coffee house on 9th, tomorrow morning, before work. I nodded once. 8? A pause, then a soft, almost imperceptible nod. She walked out without another word. I stood there for a long moment after she left. The room had mostly emptied, but the air still felt heavy, like something had cracked but not broken. Denise wasn't ready to stand up in that room, not yet, but she wasn't standing with Clarissa anymore either, and that was all I needed. The coffee house on Ninth was quiet that morning, the kind of place where regulars didn't need to order out loud. Denise was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window with a mug cradled in both hands, like she needed the warmth to stay anchored. She didn't wave me over, just nodded once, subtle, and I took the seat across from her. "I don't know how far you want to take this," she said, voice low, eyes scanning the room even though it was half empty. "But you should know. Clarissa's not stupid, she's careful." "Not careful enough," I said, pulling a still from the footage out of my folder. Her eyes dropped to it. Clarissa, in my garage, hand on the trunk. Denise didn't touch the photo, but her face drained a little. God. Did the board authorize entry? No. The answer was immediate, quiet but firm. Did you know she had a key? She hesitated. That pause wasn't indecision, it was calculation. Then, I suspected. I leaned forward. How many keys are supposed to exist? 5, one for emergencies, locked in the HOA office. The others are issued to the president, vice president, maintenance, and the fire marshal. No duplicates unless the board approves it by vote. And did you vote? Her eyes met mine, square and steady now. Number? And no one else did either. There it was. Not just theft, not just trespassing. Unauthorized duplication of a master key, and board-level deception. "I can't prove how many she's made," Denise said, "but I've seen her use keys she shouldn't have. I never had anything solid, just little things, too many coincidences. Until now?" She nodded slowly. "Until now?" We sat in silence for a few beats. Outside traffic moved like a low tide, steady and indifferent. "She'll deny it," Denise said. "Claim the footage is edited. Say you faked it to retaliate for the fine." "She can try," I said, "but the garage has 3 entry logs. One from the security cam, one from the sensor in the lock cylinder, and one from the digital ping on the trunk. All 3 line up." She let out a breath like she hadn't realized she was holding it. "You set a trap." "I set a boundary," I corrected. She crossed it. Denise picked at the sleeve of her cardigan. "She's going to come after you harder now. I'm counting on it." That afternoon, the escalation arrived. A certified letter on HOA letterhead. A formal fine, $750 for repeated noncompliance and failure to correct visual storage violations. They attached a blurry photo of my closed garage from across the street. Nothing visible, no clutter, just the outline of a garage door like every other one on the block. She was getting sloppy. Or arrogant. Maybe both. Ethan stood behind me as I read the letter. "What now?" he asked. I held the paper between 2 fingers like something I didn't want to keep. "Now," I said. We tightened the loop. We spent that evening cataloging every item in the garage. Labeled, photographed, cross-referenced. The trunk, the metals, every toolbox and bracket. I installed an additional interior sensor beneath the trunk. Silent, magnetic, infrared. If anyone so much as breathed near it, I'd know. Ethan didn't ask questions. He just moved methodically, following my lead, even when the silence between us stretched. He knew. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was about memory. That night, I wrote up a formal complaint, not just about the fine, but about unauthorized access, key misuse, and procedural violations. I wasn't filing it yet, not until I had one more piece. I needed proof that more than just my garage had been entered, and I had a feeling Denise knew where to look. The hardware store was quiet when I walked in just after noon. I wasn't there for parts. I needed a second set of eyes. Gus was behind the counter, sorting brass fittings into labeled bins. We'd worked side by side for 10 years before I retired. He knew locks like a conductor knows tempo, down to the weight of a key in your hand. I pulled the still image from my jacket and set it on the counter. "Recognize the cut?" He glanced at it, then did a double take. "That's an SC1 head, 6-pin, but wait, that profile. That's a high security master, HOA issue. Supposed to be restricted to 5 authorized users," I said. "Clarissa wasn't one of them, not for my lock." He whistled. "She's using a bypass?" Number look closer. She used a direct entry key. No resistance in the footage. The tailpiece didn't stutter. Gus leaned in. That means she has a duplicate cut, which someone had to order, which means either someone else on the board authorized it, I said, or she did it. Off books. Gus frowned. That'd be a breach of key control protocol. Major liability. I nodded. Could I prove it? He thought for a moment, then reached under the counter. When he came back up, he was holding a laminated chart, HOA master key matrix. If she duplicated a master key, she had to match this hierarchy. If you've still got your original core installed, I can compare your keys biting to hers from the footage. And if they match, then I can verify she used a duplicated master from your HOA system. That's code violation, key fraud, possibly criminal entry. Exactly what I needed. I handed him a printed still of my original key and the closest frame I had of hers. He pulled a loop from his apron pocket and got to work. 10 minutes later, he nodded. Matched pin depths, same spacing. She didn't guess, she duplicated. I exhaled slowly. Can I quote you? Write it up, he said. I'll sign it. I left the store with my hands clenched around the page like it was a court order. Back home, Ethan was in the garage again, polishing the cedar trunk with an old microfiber cloth. The medals we'd recovered so far were lined up on the workbench. 2 were still missing. I told him where I'd been. His face tightened. She's not going to give them back, is she? Not willingly, I said, but she might not have a choice. That evening, I met Denise behind the community clubhouse. She was carrying a folder tucked tight to her chest. I looked into the key logs, she said, her voice almost a whisper. Clarissa signed out the board master key 4 times in the last 2 months. Each time, the checkout was recorded, but the return signature was missing. Convenient. I also pulled a list of recent lock service calls. She authorized 2 rekeying sessions and never brought it to a vote. And, this is big, she signed an invoice for duplicate key cutting. But the invoice only lists a quantity, not who received them. How many? 7. That made 12 in total, more than twice the authorized count. Denise, I said, this is exactly what we needed. She handed me the folder. I'm scared, she admitted. But I'm tired of being part of it just by staying silent. You're not silent anymore. She didn't answer, just nodded and turned to leave. I stood in the dark a few moments longer, flipping through the records, the timestamps, the missing returns, the duplicate order. It was all there. Clarissa hadn't just broken a rule, she'd violated a security protocol that affected the entire neighborhood, and the board either didn't know or didn't care. The difference didn't matter, because now I had proof. The house was quiet when I got home. Ethan was upstairs, probably scrolling through videos or rereading one of my dad's old letters. I sat at the kitchen table and spread Denise's folder out beside Gus's signed statement. 2 piles, 1 legal, 1 personal. The HOA had no idea what was coming. I flipped through the records again, but my focus kept drifting to the empty space on the garage shelf, the medals we couldn't recover. I'd cataloged every item like evidence in a trial, but I still hadn't filled that hole. Neither had Ethan. The way he lingered by the trunk every night, sometimes just resting a hand on the lid. It wasn't about metal or ribbon. It was memory, continuity, the last clean tether to a grandfather he barely knew and a mother he'd lost too soon. Clarissa didn't just cross a boundary. She stepped into grief with dirty shoes, and then she tried to fine us for the footprints. The line was clear now. She wasn't careless. She was calculating. She thought she was untouchable, but she'd made a mistake. She escalated too fast. The fines, the duplicate keys, the missing logs, and then the missing medals. I stood up and walked into the garage, letting the cold concrete chill my feet through my socks. The trunk stood silent, worn but strong, its brass hinges dim with age. I knelt beside it, opened the lid, and counted. 10 of 12. The Bronze Star was gone. So was the POW insignia. I'd already reported the thefts to the local precinct, but with no serials and no witnesses, the officer couldn't do much. Civil matter, they'd called it. Maybe. But Denise's records turned that civil matter into something else. Systemic abuse. I called her, voice low. She crossed into theft, I said. There was a pause. What do you want to do? We hold her accountable, I said, but I need the board to see it, not just hear it. You want to go public? Not yet, but soon. Denise exhaled like she'd been holding that breath for years. Then I'll get you everything you need. The next day, I drafted a formal demand for a key inventory and lock audit. I cited Gus's expert statement and referenced the unsigned check-ins from the HOA key log. I didn't name Clarissa directly, not yet. I signed it with the phrase, "concerned homeowner requesting procedural compliance." I left it at the HOA office in a sealed envelope. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a message from Denise. Clarissa called an emergency board meeting. Tonight. I smiled. That night, I told Ethan the plan. We're not going after her, I said. We're showing everyone else what she's been doing. You think they'll care? He asked. They'll have to, I said, because this time, it's not just about us. Clarissa's overreach had created a fracture, and Denise had opened it just wide enough. I'd widened it. Now we were going to let light in, but I wasn't done preparing. That evening, I installed 2 additional micro cameras inside the garage, positioned directly at the trunk and pointed at the door. I updated the ping log to archive off-site. I made sure every sensor would leave a traceable, digital footprint. If Clarissa tried to retaliate, I'd be ready. But the real trap was already in motion. Because when people like Clarissa operate unchecked for too long, they start believing the rules are suggestions, that no one will push back. That silence equals approval. They never expect someone like me to show up with blueprints, timestamps, and quiet resolve. The key wasn't proving she'd stepped over the line. It was showing the entire board just how far she'd dragged them with her. The community clubhouse felt different that night. The lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the folding chairs were arranged tighter than usual. Clarissa sat at the center of the head table, papers stacked before her like a shield. But something about her posture was off. Too rigid, like she was bracing for a hit. Denise wasn't sitting yet. She stood to the side, flipping through her binder, lips pressed tight. Her eyes met mine for a split second across the room, and in that glance I saw it. The choice had already been made. She stepped up to the table just before the meeting was called to order. Clarissa didn't look at her. Emergency session of the HOA board, Clarissa began. This meeting was called to address concerns regarding unauthorized access and procedural questions related to board-issued equipment. I will now open the floor to... I'd like to submit a formal disclosure, Denise said, interrupting her. Clarissa blinked. You're out of order, Treasurer Harper. Denise didn't flinch. I'm submitting a disclosure regarding the key inventory. It's relevant to this session and required by our bylaws. That got the room quiet. Denise pulled a slim folder from her binder and laid it on the table. Included are key log entries for the past 6 months, board-authorized duplication orders, and check-in signatures, or lack thereof. Also included is an invoice signed by President Mott, authorizing the production of 7 unassigned duplicates without board vote. Clarissa's expression didn't change, but her fingers stilled. Denise continued. I also have statements from the original key supplier and an independent locksmith, both confirming that master keys were duplicated in violation of HOA security protocol. One of the other board members, a balding man named Clark, leaned forward. Is this real? Denise nodded. Every document is time-stamped and cross-referenced with internal logs. Clarissa leaned back in her chair slowly. Are you accusing the board of misconduct, Treasurer? I'm accusing you, Denise said softly. And I'm not alone. She turned slightly, gesturing to me. I stood, holding up a sealed envelope. Inside is a detailed affidavit from the locksmith, who originally cut the HOA master set, confirming that an unauthorized copy was used to access my property. Included are entry timestamps, video stills, and sensor pings that corroborate the event. Someone, near the back, gasped quietly. Clarissa tried to speak, but Denise wasn't finished. There's more, she said. Her voice didn't tremble. I've spoken with multiple homeowners, quietly. They've noticed signs of intrusion, unlocked sheds, moved tools, items missing. They didn't report it because they didn't think anyone would listen. The room buzzed with murmurs now. Clarissa held her hand up. This is slander. None of this has been vetted. Clark cut in. You signed for duplicates? They were for emergencies, she snapped. Without a vote? I acted in the best interest of... No, Denise said, louder now. You acted alone, and you've put this entire board and every homeowner here at risk. Unauthorized entry isn't just a bylaw violation. It's a crime. Clarissa stood suddenly, papers spilling across the table. I won't sit here and be attacked by a bunch of cowards hiding behind forms. No one's hiding, I said from my seat. We're documenting. She turned to glare at me, eyes narrowed. You set me up. No, I said. You walked into a locked garage. You opened a private trunk. You took what didn't belong to you. That was your choice. Silence. The board conferred behind the table for a long, tense moment. When they turned back around, Clark spoke. Pending legal review, we're suspending your access to board equipment, files, and facilities, effective immediately. A third-party audit will begin tomorrow. Clarissa opened her mouth, but no sound came. She gathered her things with shaking hands and stormed out without a word. I turned back to Denise. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was relief. Clarissa was gone, but the air hadn't cleared. Suspicion lingered like smoke, and now the board was scrambling to avoid being caught in the blaze she left behind. The next morning, I got a call from Denise. She's already trying to spin it, she said. Claims you doctored the footage, says this is a personal vendetta because of the fines. Let her spin, I said. The locks don't lie. Denise paused. We need more than just reaction. We need consequence. Proof that her actions didn't just violate trust, they endangered property and safety. I already knew what came next. The locks, I said. All of them. Denise agreed to issue a board directive, quietly, to authorize a voluntary audit of the community's lock systems. The language was soft, careful. Routine assessment of access controls to ensure compliance with HOA safety protocols. I volunteered to lead it. They didn't ask why. By noon, I had 10 households signed up. I started with Alan's place on the corner. He met me in his driveway, arms crossed, eyes tired. Didn't think we'd come to this, he said. Neither did I replied, holding up my lock scope. His garage cylinder had telltale scratches, fine and consistent, the kind left by master key teeth grinding against an imperfect fit. How many people have your garage key? I asked. Just me and my wife. Then someone else has been here. He didn't speak, just looked toward the garage like it had become a stranger. At the next house, it was the same, slight wear on the inner pins. One neighbor even found a rake missing. He thought it was just his memory failing. By the end of the day, I'd examined 23 locks. 14 showed signs of secondary access. 7 had homeowners who admitted they'd noticed odd things but hadn't connected the dots. I compiled every finding into a spreadsheet. Denise added a column for dates of reported disturbances. The overlaps were impossible to ignore. That evening, we sat at my dining table, reviewing the data. Ethan hovered nearby, quiet, pretending to do homework but watching every move. She had a pattern, Denise said. It wasn't random. No, I said. She was looking for something, or maybe just reminding people she could. I still don't know how she thought no one would find out. Because they never did before. Denise looked up from the spreadsheet. We need to bring this to the homeowners, not just the board. You ready for that? She nodded, but I saw the weight behind her eyes. People deserve to know. I glanced at Ethan. You okay with that? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, if it means getting Grandpa's medals back, yeah. The next day I sent a mass email to the HOA mailing list. Simple, factual, direct. Subject: security breach and key audit results. Body: Dear neighbors, in light of recent concerns about unauthorized access, I conducted a voluntary audit of home locks with board approval. Of 23 homes, 14 showed signs of secondary access consistent with unauthorized master key usage. If you'd like your property assessed, I will be available this weekend. I attached Gus's statement and a redacted version of Denise's findings. No speculation, no accusations, just the facts. Within an hour, I had 32 responses. Some were angry, some were scared, but none were surprised. I'd built the trap slowly, patiently, just like I used to build vault security systems. Now, all the tumblers were clicking into place. Saturday morning came with a low haze and a line of residents stretching down my driveway. They weren't here for small talk. They were here for locks. I'd set up a folding table with everything I needed: scopes, tension tools, a digital pin reader. Ethan sat beside me, clipboard in hand, logging each address. We weren't just checking cylinders, we were mapping a pattern. Mrs. Langston from Willow Court was first. She handed me her spare key with trembling fingers. "I thought I was going crazy," she whispered. "My laundry door was open last week. I closed it 3 times. I checked the cylinder. Pins 4 and 6 showed advanced wear, fresh enough to be recent, deep enough to confirm repeat use. I marked it, thanked her, and moved to the next. By noon, we'd logged 21 more homes. 9 had clear signs of unauthorized entry. 5 had minor indicators, enough to raise suspicion, but not conclusive. 1 had a busted cylinder someone tried to cover with polish. That one chilled me. It meant someone had made a mistake and tried to hide it. I uploaded every report into the spreadsheet Denise had started. We color-coded the results: green for clean, yellow for inconclusive, red for confirmed intrusion. The map that formed looked like a heat signature across the neighborhood, concentrated around the main loop where Clarissa had the most enforcement history. After the last assessment, I packed up and walked the results straight to Denise's house. She met me at the door, eyes already scanning the folder I held out. 23 more, I said. 9 confirmed. She opened the file and exhaled hard. She's going to deny every inch of this. She can try, but this isn't one incident anymore. This is a breach pattern. We sat in her dining room, side by side at her laptop. She drafted the agenda for the next HOA meeting, set for 3 days from now. I read over her shoulder. Item 3. Proposed motion for full lock system. Overhaul and access investigation. You sure they'll go for it? She asked. If they don't, we take it public. Her fingers paused on the keyboard. Media? Local first. Homeowners talk. Someone's already posting about it in the community forum. I guarantee it spreads. She looked at me. What do you want out of this, Mark? It was the first time she'd asked. I thought of the cedar trunk, the empty slots, the way Ethan's hand hovered over it sometimes, like it still held heat from his grandfather's hand. I want it back, I said. What she took, what she tried to control. Denise nodded slowly. Then, let's make sure this board sees it too. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up refining the presentation. Not just lock diagrams and pin logs, patterns, timestamps, key control violations, and resident statements. I built it like a case file, each slide more damning than the last. Ethan came down around midnight, bleary-eyed, rubbing his face. You okay? He asked. I nodded. Just finishing something. He looked at the screen, the heat map, the key diagrams. He didn't say much, just stood there, arms crossed. I want to help, he said. You already are. He shook his head. At the meeting. I want to speak. I turned to him, surprised. You don't have to do that. I know, he said. But she didn't just steal from you. She stole from me, too. For the first time since this started, I saw the weight lift from his shoulders. Not because the burden was gone, but because he was ready to carry it with me. All right, I said. Then let's do this together. Tuesday evening, the clubhouse parking lot was full before the meeting even started. People stood in clusters outside the glass doors, talking low and fast, some clutching printouts of the audit results I'd emailed over the weekend. Denise had told me the board expected more attendees than usual, but no one anticipated this kind of turnout. Inside, the folding chairs were packed. A few people stood along the back wall. The usual stale hush had been replaced with a charged silence, like everyone was waiting for something to finally snap. I took a seat near the front. Ethan sat beside me, his hand wrapped around a printed statement, folded once down the middle. Clarissa wasn't there. The board looked thinner without her, but also strangely lighter. No one filled her chair. Clark, the vice president, opened the meeting. Thank you all for coming. We're here to discuss the security audit findings and the events that led to this emergency session. As you know, we've suspended the President Mott pending investigation. Tonight, we'll be reviewing formal documentation provided by a homeowner and a board member regarding potential misconduct. His voice was steady, but his jaw clenched after every few words. Denise stood and walked slowly to the front, a manila envelope tucked under one arm. She didn't look at the audience as she opened it. She looked at me. I nodded once. She laid out the documents across the table. Logs, invoices, audit data, the locksmith affidavit. Then she began. Over the next 20 minutes, Denise walked through the key misuse step by step, the duplication records, the lack of board authorization, the timing of the access logs. She never raised her voice. She didn't editorialize. She let the facts speak, each one landing heavier than the last. By the time she finished, the room had shifted. People leaned forward. Crossed arms had dropped. Phones were out, recording. Then Clark said, "We have received a request from a community member to speak before the board. Mark Holloway, the floor is yours." I stood, unzipping the black binder I'd carried like a weapon. "I'm not here to shout," I said. "I'm here because someone used their power to step into my home, without consent, without cause, and took something that didn't belong to them." I held up the side-by-side stills. Clarissa's key, my key. This isn't theory, this is a technical match, and I have affidavits to back it. I flipped to the spreadsheet. Of 46 homes surveyed, 23 showed signs of unauthorized access. 14 were confirmed with matching wear patterns. 7 families noticed missing or displaced items. I paused. This wasn't enforcement. This was control. Then I stepped aside. Ethan stood. His voice didn't shake. "My grandfather's medals were in that trunk. My mom used to say they were proof he never backed down. That's what I held on to after she died. And now, 2 of them are gone." He looked at the board, straight in the eye. "No one gave her permission to take them, and no one stopped her." Silence. Then someone in the back stood. "I found my back gate open last month. Thought it was the wind." Another voice. "She fined me for a kayak she later said she never saw." The dam broke. Clark raised a hand, and the room fell quiet. "We will move to a vote to authorize a full independent audit. If confirmed, we'll move to legal action and permanent removal of Ms. Mott from the board. We'll also open nominations for new leadership positions, effective immediately." I sat down, heart pounding, Ethan still standing beside me. Denise turned in her seat and met my eyes again. We weren't done yet, but we were no longer alone. The vote wasn't close. Clark read the final tally aloud, his voice steady despite the weight behind the numbers. 48 votes in favor of removal, 3 opposed, 1 abstention. He didn't look up from the paper. Effective immediately, Clarissa Mott is stripped of all HOA authority. Pending legal review, an external audit will begin this week. The room stayed quiet for a breath, then scattered applause began at the back. Hesitant, almost unsure if it was allowed. But then it grew, louder, firmer, not triumphant, but necessary. A release. I didn't clap. I was already standing. There was one last thing I had to do. Denise moved beside me and whispered, "You sure?" She doesn't get to vanish quietly. A side door opened at the far wall. A uniformed officer stepped inside, flanked by a woman in business attire, plain suit, firm posture, county legal observer. She scanned the room and nodded once. And then Clarissa entered. She wasn't smug anymore. Her hair was pulled back tight, no makeup, no clipboard. Just a beige folder in her arms and the brittle pride of someone who still thought silence was armor. The crowd parted without anyone asking. No greetings, no whispers, just space. She stopped in front of the board table. "I'd like to make a statement." Clark hesitated. "Proceed." "I categorically deny all accusations of misconduct," she began. "I operated within the authority granted by the community bylaws. Any copies of access keys were authorized for safety inspections and emergency compliance checks. No items were knowingly taken. If any errors occurred, they were administrative, nothing more." Denise stood slowly. "Clarissa, there were no safety inspections scheduled on the days in question." "I have documentation," Clarissa said, raising the folder. "It will be submitted through proper legal channels." I stepped forward. "Then where are my father's medals?" She didn't answer. I stepped closer. "The Bronze Star, the POW insignia. You opened the trunk. I have the footage. I have sensor logs, timestamps, even your shadow passing the side cabinet. So, if this was all by the book, tell me, where are the medals?" Clarissa's fingers tightened around the folder. "I don't have them." "Then who does?" "I don't know." A lie. I could see it in her throat, the way it tensed before the words came out. The officer took a step forward. "Ms. Mott, please accompany me outside. You're not under arrest, but we have questions regarding a property report filed with the county." Clarissa didn't move at first. Then she exhaled through her nose, sharp and short, and followed him out. She didn't look back. Once the door shut, the room stayed still. Denise walked to the center of the room. We'll need volunteers for the audit, people willing to help rebuild trust. Hands went up, one after another, some shaky, some firm. People who'd been quiet for too long. Alan stood beside me, jaw tight. "Didn't think you'd pull it off," he said. I didn't. He looked confused. I nodded toward Denise, toward Ethan. "I just opened the door." He smiled faintly. "Hell of a door." Ethan leaned closer. "Can we go home now?" "Yeah," I said, hand on his shoulder. "Let's go home." As we stepped outside, the sun was just beginning to dip behind the rooftops. The air smelled like jasmine and clean pavement. For the first time in weeks, it felt like the neighborhood was breathing again. We got in the truck. Ethan buckled up in silence. Then he said, "Do you think we'll ever get them back?" I didn't lie. "I don't know." He nodded slowly, staring out the window. "But we got something else back tonight," I added. "And maybe that matters more." He didn't answer, but when I reached over to ruffle his hair, he didn't pull away. The medals never turned up. We checked the usual places: pawn shops, estate consignment sites, even a few sketchier online resale platforms. Denise filed a formal report with the board's legal counsel, and I followed up with the police twice, but without a serial number or identifiable markings, the trail went cold. Clarissa never confessed. She lawyered up after that final meeting, issued a boilerplate statement through her attorney, and faded into whatever dark corner people like her crawl into when they're done playing queen. The audit confirmed everything we'd found: duplicated keys, unrecorded entries, manufactured citations. A few other board members resigned quietly. But something bigger happened too. The neighbors stopped whispering. The man on Magnolia who never spoke past a wave now greets me by name. Mrs. Langston organizes potlucks. Clark, of all people, built a shared tool shed for storm prep equipment, something the HOA used to fine people for storing improperly. Ethan and I rebuilt the cedar trunk lock, not because we were afraid, but because it was ours now. A new lock, handcrafted by both of us, with grooves he cut under my watch. It wasn't just secure, it was personal. The missing medals, they still hurt, but the silence hurt more, and that's what we broke. At the next election, Denise ran for HOA president. She didn't even need a speech, just stood there with a copy of the audit findings and said, "I won't let it happen again." She won by a landslide. Last week she handed me a framed resolution, unanimous board vote to ban master key duplication without full board approval and homeowner consent. It's called the Holloway Provision. I didn't frame it, I bolted it to the garage wall. Ethan said Grandpa would have liked that. I think he would have too. Later that night, Ethan sat on the edge of the workbench, flipping through one of his grandfather's old letters. "She tried to make us feel small," he said. "She failed," I replied. He nodded and closed the envelope gently, like sealing it meant sealing everything that had come before. We didn't win because I shouted louder. We didn't win because I had more money or because I played dirty. We won because we knew what mattered, and we refused to let anyone take it from us, not without a fight. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now. Share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. You're not alone, and you never have to be again.